and we crowdfunded, so we needed about £5,000. We gave ourselves 3 weeks to get it, and within the first 2 days we had 5,000. At the end of the 3 weeks we crowdfunded to like 10,000. So we've got a tree in the bakery, and it's just this like massive orange tree, and in each orange is the crowdfunder's name. And some people, like local people, giving £5, £10, £50, and then there'll also be like people from all around the world giving like £10, £15. We have people like California, Australia, New Zealand, like everywhere. It was so cool. And then like 6 months from when I baked my first loaf, we opened the shop, and then we've been doing that for a year now. So that's kind of how it all happened, but it was all quite organic and not planned at all. I didn't really choose to. Like, I always was into business and different people, never a baker, like really bad at baking. So what I'd normally do is I'd read the measurements of what was supposed to go into a cake, but not how much. So it'd be like, oh, it's got eggs, it's got flour, it's got sugar, and not like how much of those things. So I just threw them all into a bowl and then like mix it together. I would pull something out of the oven, and it was like, Scout! And what would normally come out of the oven was like a flat frisbee that you could throw. Or it'd be like fairy cakes. You know how fairy cakes have those perfect like little mounds? It'd be the opposite of that. It'd be like a fairy cake, perfect little dip. And then when I was 14, I got really, really bad mental health, and that came out in loads of different things like depression and anxiety, and I couldn't go to school anymore. I couldn't really get out of bed anymore for a long time. And then, like I was talking about at the beginning, something about doughs, it's so tactile, and for a long time my parents were amazing, and they were just trying to distract me from like wanting to go back to bed, or like just distract me from my mind and anxieties. So they tried to get me into things like knitting, which I also, maybe I'm slightly ADHD, I don't know, but I have really, really short attention span. So I could not knit for my life, because I'd knit for like a minute and then I'd be like, okay, I'm bored. Or like I'd do something like, they also tried to get me into gardening. So I'd do that for a minute and I'd be like, I'm bored, I'm done with these plants. And then one day I just watched my dad make a loaf of bread, and it wasn't amazing. It was like a sourdough baker. It was kind of like this big, dense breeze block of a loaf. And he was quite like slapping forward, and there was mess going everywhere. But I loved that. And I watched him do that, and I like kind of forced him to teach me. And then once I did, like, the thing about bread is it's a process. It takes 24 hours to make. So I knew that I had to be there in the morning to put the bread in the oven, and I had to get out of bed, and I had to keep breathing and keep living and keep doing. And that really, really helped me. And then I started making like 2 loaves a day, 3 loaves a day, and I have quite obsessive behaviour. So I started making like 5 loaves a day. And by this point, like, our pure bread diet had just hit a plateau. We just couldn't do anymore. So I started delivering it to different neighbours' houses, and those neighbours would then like tell their friends about it, and those friends would tell their neighbours, and suddenly word spread, and I'd be like walking down the street and someone would stop their car and be like, are you the person selling bread? I'd be like, yeah. So it's kind of like this underground operation. So I was making like 6 loaves a day. We have an elderly Arga, so I couldn't do them in the Arga anymore. So in the morning at about like 5 o'clock, I go around to our neighbour's house who were asleep. They knew about this. This wasn't like without them knowing. They gave me the keys, and I put these Dutch, like these, casserole dishes. They're amazing for baking bread in. So I put about 6 of those in their oven, and I turn them all on. And then they'd all go to work, go to school, and then I'd come back. And by now they'd be really, really hot, and I'd lower my doughs in, and I'd bake the bread. And then I'd like load it up hot into these paper bags and cycle it around the village to different people's houses and doorsteps. And I'd also give out like free ones to people who I thought might want our bread as like customers. And then it just grew. So I had like a subscription service, doing like 10 a day. And then I wanted to do pop-ups. And this was like, it sounds like a lot, but it happened very quickly too, because I am quite obsessive. So, like, things moved fast. So I did a subscription service for like 2 months, and I decided to do pop-ups, and then I did pop-ups for 2 months. And then at the end of my like 8th pop-up, this really nice guy came, and he did a little bit like Paddington Bear in leathers. And he was really nice, but he had a shop on the high street for rent. And by this point, I dragged my dad into the production a little bit, but he was still working. So he just like helped me on a Monday and a Tuesday, but he couldn't do any of the Friday or the pop-up stuff because he was working really hard. and I really wanted to go for this shop, and he was quite nervous, but I realised that we didn't have any money either, so we'd have to find funding, and he probably wouldn't be able to carry on working, or he'd have to switch full time. But this is something he also always really wanted. I think that's the other thing, like, he always really wanted to be a small business owner, and he's amazing at it. So he's amazing at all the accounts. He's also like amazing at tying it into the community and doing things for them too. So then he decided to like join and come on board, and we crowdfunded. So we needed about £5,000. We gave ourselves 3 weeks to get it, and within the first 2 days we had 5,000. At the end of the 3 weeks, we crowdfunded to like 10,000. So we've got a tree and the bakery, and it's just this like massive orange tree, and then each orange is the crowdfunder's name. And some people, like, local people giving £5, £10, £50, and then there'll also be like people from all around the world giving like £10, £15. We have people like California, Australia, New Zealand, like everywhere. It was so cool. And then like 6 months from when I baked my first loaf, we opened the shop, and then we've been doing that for a year now. So that's kind of how it all happened, but it was all quite organic and not planned at all.
It's amazing.
Our journey, and like, so we're writing the book at the moment, and all of the book is done by the Instagram. So like we can't remember really what happened a year ago. So we look on the Instagram and we look about what happened a year ago, and we're like, oh, we went to Copenhagen or something like that. And like it's a really nice, almost like a diary, like a mental reminder. But I love how you've been able to follow the journey. It's going good. So like after you write a book, it takes about a year to then be published. So like it'll come out when I'm like 18 or something. But it's going good. So we're like nearly halfway through. I'm in charge of the recipes. So I'm also doing about the story, but mainly like the recipes, and Dad's structuring the story and doing lots of that. But I'm finding it really hard actually, because I have like a massive paradox of choice thing going on. So I hate too much choice. And with the recipes, I'm like, oh my God, I've got to like do 80 recipes, and I've got 200 recipes in my head, off the top of my head, like I want to put in, and limiting that down. And also then thinking like, what do I want these recipes to be like? Like, how are they going to stand out? How are they going to be original? How are they going to be different? But then how are they also going to be like unique and real and ours? So I think all of those things, but I'm also loving it at the same time. But again, like with the cakes, I'm really bad with my measurements. So often I'll make something and everyone will be like, that's amazing. And I'll be like, I can't even remember what I did there. Or I also like to experiment the whole time. So what we did one week is completely different to what we do the next week. Or what I did today will be different to what I do tomorrow. So I'm not really good at like having that consistency. I do change it the whole time. So it's just like slowing down when I do something really good, remembering what I did, and then writing it down.
So do you go...
The thing about dough is it is alive. It doesn't live by like hour by hour. It's not like cakes or biscuits or something like that. You just have to see how it feels and then judge it by that. Because if you go too soon, then you end up like really dense, cold, hard loaves. But if you go too late, then they'll be overproofed and they'll be flat and like too aerated almost. So it's getting like that combination. That's just done by tactileness. No, but it is kind of, again, maybe it's the dyslexic mind, whatever it is, it's just that lateral thinking. But also, like, I'm only happy if I'm spinning like 2 plates or 3 plates. I find it really hard. It's like I can't watch TV. I can't sit and just watch TV. I need to be like doing something while doing that. And the same with dough. Like, what I love about it is while I'm doing this, I'm thinking about what I need to do with these. Or I'm thinking about, or at the same time, I'm making some croissant dough or whatever. And I love that like multi-doing, and it means that I do so much more to when I just have to like do one thing for an hour. I can't take breaks, so I used to find it really, really difficult to take a break. Like the bakery, and the thing about that is like, even though we might be Ferraris or whatever it is, or like even though we are happiest when we're busy, we can't always be busy because then we burn out. And I've like burnt out probably once, maybe twice. And like it's horrible when you burn out because you just can't think anymore. And it's like that's kind of a whole purpose or sense of self is around doing and busy and thinking and moving and doing and producing and being productive. But actually I've had to like find different ways to take that break. So if that break is literally travelling or being somewhere different and then having to do stuff around that, that's fine. So I know that for me a break isn't, I can't like sit and watch TV for 2 hours on a Sunday or whatever it might be. That isn't a break for me. But it might be, I don't know, writing some more recipes or doing something that is enough to stimulate you but isn't too much. And like I've had to really like find my way with that actually. So I used to find that really hard to just stop doing. And I learned that I can't stop doing, and that's fine. It's just finding the things that are equivalent to not doing anything. That's just really gentle. I was at primary school, because I went to my like 2 local state schools. In primary school, I was part of that slightly special group, because I feel like primary school you're very much focused on there's one way of learning, and there was a really easy way to regulate if a child was clever or not clever, and that sort of things like telling the time or knowing the month of the year or spelling or things like I always really struggled. Do you write right to left or do you write left to right? I always used to struggle. So even in year 6 when I did my SATs exam, I think I did one paper and I wrote the wrong way. And I think it was fine, but I always really struggled with little things like that. So at primary school, I was part of that slightly special group that would go off with the teacher assistant, which I loved, to be honest. That was the best group. You didn't have to do much work, and you got stickers the whole time. But then at secondary school, I'm quite competitive, and I have quite a drive. And at secondary school, we were very much ranked. So there were 5 sets, and if you were the 5th set, you had learning difficulties. And if you were 4th, you weren't like the cleverest bunny. And then like the top set obviously was like the brainiacs. And I was 4th set for everything. And I was very competitive, and my siblings had been like 1st and 2nd sets. So I was like, oh, right, this is like a goal. It's so there, it's so physical, so mental. So I also realised that you weren't assessed in the same way you were in primary schools, and like how you learn, it was more how hard you could try, which is really good in some ways, but also meant I could just try 5 times harder, and I did 3 times better. So I used to work so hard in like year 7, year 8, when everyone else was just like playing or having fun or just messing about. I'd be like, got my head in the game, just like really, really driven. Any homework project I spent like hours doing. I used to do these English projects when we took a book and pulled it apart, and I'd make them like the size of a book basically, and I'd like doodles and illustrations, and I loved all of that. But it also meant that when things started to get hard, so in like year 9, I had to ramp it up even more. So when everyone else started to ramp it up by 2 or 3, I had to ramp it up by like 7. And by year 9, I'd got finally into all the top sets. So I'd gone from 4th set in year 7 to top like everything in year 9. But then even that wasn't quite enough. So now I've like learned to kind of to sustain my goals, and like how sometimes a goal is great and then maybe that isn't enough, and tell myself when it is. And in secondary school, it's like once I was top set, then I wanted to be the best at every class, and I wanted to get the award at the end of the year in at least 3 classes or whatever, which was so, just like pointless slightly. And even things like drama, I wanted to be the best at, or sport, I wanted to be in every team. And it's not because I enjoy this subject, it's because I wanted to be that, I wanted to say that, I wanted to and it felt safe to be the best, because it meant it just felt safe and it felt right. And then I think that also kind of led me to burn out slightly, or led me to be quite harsh on myself, because it meant then when I did get the awards, or when I was the top of the class, when I did get the best in English or whatever, there was nowhere to go, and actually I just exhausted myself. And so school was a weird experience, and it was an amazing experience for so many different ways, and I learned so much, but it also just wasn't the right environment for me. And when I learned that was really scary too, because I looked at different schools, but also when you think of a homeschool kid, you kind of have this stereotype in your head, they live with trees and hello. and they walk around like barefooted and things like that. And then kind of we just had to in the end, which was kind of the best way of doing it, because it means you don't go, oh, what if, or should I, or is this right? You just had a yes or no, or there's no choice in it, which actually really worked. It's just like, it's just talking to people and talking to people about things. I mean, like, before you came, I didn't really think I had one. Then, like, that first initial conversation with you, I was like, actually, all the things that you find hard, which is like part of the way your brain works, I do too. And that's really nice too, to like know you're not alone. Like, it's just a way different minds work. When I was like 5, I get all dressed up, and then like my parents would come, or even like I would be like 10. It's just like end of primary school. I get all dressed up, and my parents would be like, "It's not a school day." It was the best feeling ever. But like I'd be like, "Oh, okay,
It's the weekend.
it's the weekend," and I just didn't get that. But also really interesting. They were looking at like the stats and income. People who specialised early had a higher income for the first 5 years. The people who specialised later had a higher income after that 5 years, and they had a much quicker spike because they went off and they learned all these different things, while that person was just learning one. And then when it came to like the job or whatever it might be, they were able to put on all these different things to climb up really high. I love baking, but I would never describe myself as like just a baker. And I love food, but like I don't, when I've got my days off, I'm not going to be making a batch of 12 donuts, because actually it's not the making the donuts that gets me excited, it's making them alongside all the different things I'm making, and it's making them in huge batches, and it's making them for people to eat and enjoy, and it's all that stuff that goes with it that I really enjoy. So I think the skills that goes into baking and running a bakery, my dad's amazing, or like the financial things, but I sit in and listen and just learn about all of that, which is fascinating. It's probably just schedules and how things fit together and how to manipulate schedules so that you can be creative and inventive still. So I talk to so many different bakers who are working so hard but doing the same thing every single day because their business is really big, or the bakery is big and wholesale, and they can't experiment, they don't have that creativity. Or I talk to bakers who are so creative that they never get a time to stop, and they're not actually being able to make a lot because they're spending so much time doing this or that, or they're creating loads of waste. So I love seeing how you can manipulate schedules and routines to fit together and like pieces of the puzzle. So that's really business side, but also future. I'm much more interested in business probably than I am like in baking, and just the influence of business I find is fascinating. I mean, in 2000, I think it was 2003, when lots of the third world countries were really, really struggling. The governments of all like very rich and wealthy countries, like us, like America, they all decided to give, I think it was 300 billion, and give this money and invest it in like these third world countries. But then all the businesses came together and they donated, or not donated, they invested 300 trillion, I think it was. It was a crazy amount, like 3 times whatever the governments could give, because they invested in the communities by building the roads and factories and by building their own factories there. And just the influence of business is so much stronger than anything else in the world. So that's what like drives me forward, and that's what I'm really itching to get into basically. Thinking wider scale, there's this really interesting corporation called B Corp, and loads of like I love businesses because I love this new idea. So B Corp is this really interesting organisation that like loads of different companies have passed, like Ben & Jerry's, Patagonia, Cook, which is like that frozen food. All of them are part of it, and it's really interesting. And what it does basically is its big belief is business is not for profit, business is for social and environmental change and influence. And I really love that idea, and that's what I want to get into business for, so I can change the environment and social and communities, not for profit, because that's so not what it's about anymore. But I think it's really interesting that there is this movement towards that, and there are all these different companies who are fascinating, who are also moving towards that.
It's just basically this sort of general underlying momentum towards making sure that whatever you are doing has some kind of social depth to it, and on all sorts of levels, in terms of what it's doing.
Environmentally?
Yeah,
and for the
sustainably, but
community.
also, within the company itself. When it comes to how it's run and how the employees are treated, it's doing the right thing or working to do the right thing. And so I think B Corp, I think it's American originally, but it's a sort of accreditation system, and basically you get assessed, or you assess yourself on all sorts of different things. Everything from how you interact with the community to how you interact with with your customers, how you interact with your employees, everything else.
Sorry.
And then if you reach a certain threshold, then you become a sort of B Corp.
And I was just wondering, like, when you were working as a dyslexia advisor, did you see sort of repeated challenges or strengths within the students that you were seeing, or not particularly? It was sort of like a case by case.
I think. I think very, very, very individual needs and very, very individual students. But I think the common challenges were the fact that time was the biggest single issue. How to manage time, how to conceive of time, how to parcel time, how to plan ahead of time. I think that was the biggest thing. In terms of the strengths, though, it's that classic cliche. People just think a little bit differently, and so it made me think differently, because often they'd see solutions to problems that I would never have thought of in my sort of rather linear way of working. And there's a kind of resilience as well there, which is probably less to do with nature and more to do with nurture, the fact that people have had to work very hard, sometimes a lot harder than their contemporaries, to keep up within a sort of framework that doesn't necessarily give them a chance to be themselves.
I mean, it's a completely different role shift as kind of sitting at a desk helping students to then like running your own business. But yeah, how have you found sort of setting up a business, like taking that jump from leaving?
Yeah, well, I think what it's made me realise is what I've always sort of felt, which is that you shouldn't be fixed on any particular sort of path. There are these different ways of working. This is something that
round or long, Dad?
round, I think. This is something I never sort of planned to do, but I'm so glad that I am doing it. Come up with different ways of tackling things. I love this. I love the fact I've got this whole new chapter opening up ahead of me. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
The end of your life.
Yeah, at the end of my life. I think what I loved about working at that student level was that you were able to move away from those specifics and the rights and the wrongs, and you were able to think much more about giving possible options for making things work better. But you were working with the students inside of it, so it was looking at what their skill set already was, and then trying to sort of just recalibrate it just a little bit. So they were in control. And I think that was the key thing, really, is putting the student in control rather than...
So they own it.
Yeah. Rather than you being in control as a teacher. It would, just following on from our conversation about sort of B Corp and everything else, I'd love to create something that was economically sustainable, where you were really giving opportunities to people who might really struggle to get those opportunities elsewhere. So whether that's working with ex-prisoners or working with people on sort of long-term unemployment, young people who just need that opportunity to sort of train up and aren't getting it, and to just become this real sort of core food hub as well. There's a lot of really, really interesting stuff going on about food at the moment, and the problem is that once you start to, quite often people, when they try and talk about it, it sounds as if they're preaching. And we get very defensive about food, but we do. I would love to be able to, in a very discreet, gentle way, bring about some of the sort of awareness that we could have about food in a way that made people really excited and a part of things rather than feeling guilty or shifty. I think what we love about the bakery and what comes through in so much of Kitty's bakes is it's a sheer joy. It's a sort of, there is a joy in the making, and there's a joy in the selling, and there's a joy in seeing other people enjoy the food as well, because it is just a little bit different.
Yeah.
It's a sort of, why not? Increasingly, I think we'll move away from this whole idea of labels. I think this term neurodiversity is so much better. And I think that'll become more inclusive. I think the diagnostic labels tend to make things a little bit exclusive. And I think we'll begin to realise, I do think we're heading into a really challenging but really exciting future of work and living and thinking on all sorts of levels. We were before the pandemic, we are even more so now. And I think the way of thinking, when you think a bit differently, will really, really count. Yeah, there's a reason why these characteristics exist, and yet so much of life in the past 100 years has kind of made you go, but why? What's the benefit of it? Doesn't seem to benefit you at school because it hampers your spelling, it hampers your reading, it impacts on you organising your time. It doesn't seem to help with work, because work has often been a continuation of school. It's been a clerical task, or it's been a time organisation task, or it's been about needing to read and needing to write. And so much of our life in the past sort of century has not worked in the favour of people who are wired differently. Whereas I think the next century, where people won't be in one job, they'll probably have to change jobs, and adapting to change is something that I think people with neurodiversity are very good at doing, because it's hard for them to change, and so they have to work that bit harder. I think jobs themselves will rely much less on the clerical side, on reading and writing. It'll be about absorbing information visually, it already is, and orally, and it'll be about communicating that information verbally or pictorially or in some sort of form that actually might really benefit the way that people who think differently are. I think there's going to be an awful lot of industries and jobs that will be at their infancy that we don't know about yet, and that will require a lot of problem solving along the way. There won't be one set way of doing things in the way that there is to learn how to be a doctor, or learn how to be a lawyer, or learn how to be an accountant. At the moment, there'll be jobs where we don't know what they'll be, and we'll hit these problems, and the people who will be really good at finding solutions will be the people who think differently and don't just think, well, they would just keep going in this linear way. I think it'll be the people who think a bit differently. That's not to say it's not still going to be a real challenge for people at various different points of their lives, but I think there'll be a greater sense of respect for the way that they think differently. Whereas I think in the past, it was much more a sort of conformist approach, and if you thought differently, if you were outside of the guidelines, the guardrails, people were a little bit suspicious of that, or thought that it was a deficit to your character rather than an asset.